A wealthy woman humiliates and mistreats a black waiter, but is shocked when she finds out who he really is. The Rosewood, a five-star restaurant in the heart of New York City, was famous for catering to the city's elite. From celebrities to politicians, the crowd that dined there valued not only the fine cuisine, but also the status that the restaurant symbolized. With its soft lighting and elegant decor, the atmosphere oozed exclusivity. That night, one of the restaurant's most demanding clients, Victoria Hamilton, walked in with her usual arrogant demeanor. Wealthy since birth, Victoria carried herself with an air of superiority. Her expensive dress and understated, yet extremely pricey jewelry reflected her status. She was accompanied by her longtime friend, Megan, who seemed slightly uncomfortable with the overly formal environment, but tried to keep up with Victoria's pace. Victoria entered the Rosewood as if she owned the place, not bothering to acknowledge the staff, who politely held the doors open for her. She expected the service to be as impeccable as the food, and that the waiters would know her name without needing to introduce herself. What Victoria didn't know was that the restaurant's actual owner, Michael Carter, a black man, was working that night as one of the waiters. Michael was a successful businessman who preferred to stay behind the scenes, but occasionally he'd put on the waiter's apron to observe how the guests and staff interacted. It was a strategy he used to ensure that the experience his restaurant offered was always up to his high standards. As soon as Michael saw Victoria walk in, he knew it was going to be a challenging night. He had heard about her reputation, a difficult customer who often complained about the service and made ridiculous demands. He approached with a professional smile, greeting the two women. "Good evening, ladies. Welcome to the Rosewood. May I show you to your table?" Michael offered, keeping his tone cordial. Victoria barely looked at him. "Yes, of course," she responded, as if he were nothing more than a shadow in the restaurant. Megan, on the other hand, smiled politely at Michael, but Victoria was already walking ahead, ignoring him completely. Once seated at one of the best tables, Victoria glanced around, assessing the restaurant as if it were her own empire. She was used to doing this. "I hope the service is up to par tonight," she said to her friend, but loudly enough for Michael to hear as he passed by with the menus. Michael, used to this kind of behavior, kept his composure. He knew the night would be long, but he wasn't going to let a customer's arrogance throw him off. He was the owner of the restaurant, after all, and dealing with people like Victoria was part of the job. With the menu in hand, Victoria began making demands before really even looking at the options. "I expect the wine to be perfectly chilled. Last time, it wasn't at the right temperature," she said while flipping through the menu. "And I prefer my main course to be made with organic ingredients. You have your own farm, right?" Michael, still smiling politely, responded calmly, "Our wine is stored at a controlled temperature, ma'am, and all our ingredients come from trusted organic suppliers. We'll make sure your experience is perfect tonight." "It better be," Victoria muttered, almost dismissively, as she made her order. What Victoria didn't know was that Michael, the man she was treating like just another waiter, had much more control over the situation than she could ever imagine. To him, it was just another day at work. But for Victoria, that night would teach her an unexpected lesson. As Michael walked away to get the drink order, he was already aware that this interaction was only the beginning of a tense evening, and he was ready to handle every challenge with the calm and professionalism that always accompanied him. Michael returned to the table with the same elegance and composure he maintained in even the most difficult situations. He carefully placed the wine on the table and began serving it, fully aware of Victoria's critical gaze. "Let me see if it's at the right temperature," she said, not even looking at Michael, as she picked up the glass and swirled the liquid gently. She tasted the wine, keeping her expression neutral for a brief moment before nodding. "It's acceptable," she declared. "Although I would have preferred French wine. This is Italian, right?" The question wasn't genuine. It was dripping with disdain, as if the fact that it was Italian was a failure of the restaurant. Michael, still smiling, replied, "Yes, ma'am. This is a Barolo vintage from one of Italy's most prestigious vineyards, but we do have excellent French options if you'd prefer." "No matter," Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Since you've brought this one, you can leave it. Just don't ruin the rest of the evening." Megan, sitting across from Victoria, shot Michael a quick look as if to silently apologize for her friend's behavior. She always felt uncomfortable in situations like this, but knew that Victoria enjoyed showing her power in environments like this. Michael, for his part, remained unbothered. He was used to difficult customers. He knew that people like Victoria often felt the need to assert themselves by belittling those they saw as beneath them. "Are you ready to order?" Michael asked, maintaining his professional tone. Victoria paused dramatically, looking over the menu as if deciding between very important dishes. After a few seconds, she closed the menu with a light snap. "I'll have the salmon, but I want it prepared differently than what's on the menu. No sauces, no heavy sides, something light and healthy. You understand, don't you? I don't expect someone like you to know much about fine dining, but I trust you can relay this correctly to the kitchen. Let's have some fun with those who only read the comments. They won't understand. Comment Brigadero below. Only those who've read this far will get it. Now let's continue with the story." Michael nodded, unfazed. "Of course, ma'am. I'll make sure the dish is prepared exactly as you requested." "That's the least you can do," Victoria muttered, still not looking at him. She then turned her attention back to Megan, completely ignoring Michael. Megan, trying to ease the tension, made her order in a much friendlier manner, asking for a simple salad. She thanked Michael, and he walked away to relay the orders to the kitchen. As he walked, Michael reflected on the interaction. That kind of arrogant behavior wasn't new to him, especially in a restaurant where many customers felt entitled to treat staff with disdain. He knew that his appearance, being a black man, discreet, and in a waiter's role, often triggered unconscious or explicit biases, like the ones Victoria was clearly displaying. But unlike many of the other employees who might feel powerless in the face of such behavior, Michael was in a unique position. He was the owner of the Rosewood, one of the city's most renowned restaurants, and he had earned that status through hard work and perseverance. He had a power that Victoria couldn't even imagine, and that gave him a sense of calm despite the disrespect he was receiving. Back in the kitchen, Michael explained Victoria's demands to the chef, who raised an eyebrow. "Is she always like this?" the chef asked, smiling. Michael just shrugged. "Tonight, it seems she's on a special mission to test our patience. But the food needs to come out exactly as she wants. We can't give her any room for complaints." The chef chuckled and nodded. "Leave it to me." As the order was being prepared, Michael continued to serve other tables, keeping an eye on Victoria's behavior. Several times he noticed her watching him from afar, as if evaluating him. It was as though she was waiting to find something wrong with his service, something she could criticize to reinforce her sense of superiority. After some time, Victoria's dish was ready. Michael made a point of bringing it to the table himself, carefully placing it in front of her. "Your salmon, prepared as requested, ma'am," he said with a slight professional smile. Victoria looked at the plate as if inspecting a piece of art. She slowly picked up her fork, cut a piece of the fish, and brought it to her mouth. There was a pause, and Michael watched as she chewed with a neutral expression. Finally, she placed the fork down and said, "It's acceptable, but I've had better." Megan let out a small sigh, casting a sympathetic glance at Michael, who remained unflappable. "I'm glad it's to your liking, ma'am," Michael replied with impeccable composure. "If you need anything else, I'll be here." "I expect so," Victoria responded coldly before turning back to her friend and continuing the conversation as if Michael were invisible. Victoria was only just beginning her night of superiority. After giving her verdict on the salmon, she continued her conversation with Megan, but always with the air of someone waiting for another opportunity to criticize. "Have you noticed how the service here is a bit below standard?" Victoria remarked casually, not bothering to lower her voice. "It's not what it used to be. Back when real waiters worked here, they knew what they were doing." Megan gave a quick, uncomfortable glance to the table next to them, where other diners seemed to have overheard the comment. "I think he's doing a good job," she replied carefully. "He seems to be trying." Victoria let out a dismissive laugh. "Trying isn't enough in a place like this, Megan. If you're paying this much for a meal, You have the right to expect perfection. And honestly, I don't think they train properly anymore. They probably just hire anyone these days. I mean, look at him." She leaned in conspiratorially. "He seems so out of place here, like he doesn't know what real luxury is." Megan frowned. "You're exaggerating, Victoria. He's been polite the whole time." "Politeness isn't enough," Victoria retorted quickly. "He should know how to read his customers, adapt to us. For example, I expected him to know which wine would pair best with the dish. But of course, you can't expect that from someone like him, can you?" Michael, who was close enough to hear, continued to discreetly serve other tables, but his ears clearly caught every word. He was used to being the target of such thinly veiled comments, and unlike many customers who kept their opinions to themselves, Victoria seemed determined to make her prejudice clear. As the evening wore on, Victoria continued to find small flaws in every detail of the service. The napkin Michael brought was folded imperfectly. The fork didn't seem as clean as it should be. The water wasn't cold enough. Each interaction was another opportunity for her to flaunt her superiority. "Do you think he knows anything about real wine?" Victoria asked Megan with a mocking smile. "I doubt he could tell the difference between a Bordeaux and a grocery store wine." Michael returned to the table once more, responding to Victoria's call. "Can I get you anything else, ma'am?" Victoria looked at him with disdain, as if evaluating whether he was worthy of speaking to her. "You seem to know very little about wine. How can I trust you to recommend anything decent?" Michael maintained his calm and respectful tone. "We'd be happy to bring another option, ma'am. We have an excellent selection of French wines. If you prefer, I can recommend a 2005 Bordeaux, which pairs nicely with fish dishes like the salmon." Victoria raised an eyebrow, surprised by the unexpected response but unwilling to admit it. "Well, maybe you've gotten lucky and learned something," she said with sarcasm. "Bring the Bordeaux." As Michael walked away to fetch the bottle, Megan shot Victoria a disapproving look. "Why are you being so hard on him? He seems to know what he's doing." "Oh, please, Megan," Victoria responded with a self-satisfied smile. "It's all part of the experience. Testing the service, seeing if they measure up. That's what we do in places like this." When Michael returned with the bottle of wine, he made sure to follow all the protocols perfectly. He presented the label to Victoria, poured a little for her to taste, and waited for her approval. She tasted the wine, holding the glass theatrically as if she were part of a sommelier competition. "It's acceptable," she finally declared. "Basic service, but passable." Michael poured the wine with professionalism and stepped away again, knowing that Victoria would continue finding something to criticize, but keeping his impeccable posture. "You see?" Victoria said, turning back to Megan. "It took a lot of pushing for him to get it right. This is the kind of thing you have to teach these people. It's not enough to just be polite if you don't know how to serve." The tension in the restaurant was starting to build. Other diners were noticing Victoria's comments, and a few disapproving glances were cast toward the table. Megan, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to change the subject. "Maybe we should just enjoy the dinner," she suggested, clearly trying to lighten the mood. But Victoria wasn't ready to stop. "The thing is, Megan, people need to know their place, no matter where you are. If you're working in a luxury restaurant, you should understand what that means. This waiter, or whatever he is, clearly has no idea where he is." Michael, while organizing some orders in the kitchen, noticed that the situation was drawing more attention than usual. He could feel the looks from the other staff and customers, many of whom knew who he really was. But Michael was determined to keep his cover until the right moment. Victoria's arrogance grew by the minute, and Michael knew that the final reveal would be inevitable and, in a way, satisfying. He also knew he had to wait for the perfect moment to act. The prejudice and condescension she was showing, though disturbing, were nothing new to him. He had faced many like her throughout his career, but he always knew that maintaining his dignity was his greatest weapon. And the night was far from over. Victoria, feeling like she had complete control of the situation, decided to push Michael further. She looked around the restaurant with its elegant furniture and sophisticated clientele and came up with an idea. "I want something special," she said, cutting off her conversation with Megan and raising her hand to get Michael's attention as if he had been invisible until then. When he approached, Victoria crossed her arms and gave him a challenging look. "I want something that's not on the menu. Something more personalized," she said in a tone that made it clear this was more of a test than an actual desire. Michael, keeping his calm and professional demeanor, replied, "Of course, ma'am. How can I assist you?" "I'd like a seafood dish, but with a unique twist. Something creative. And please, nothing too ordinary. Surprise me," she said, with a smirk, as if already expecting Michael to fail. Megan looked at her, visibly uncomfortable with the request. "Victoria, I think you're going too far." "Going too far?" Victoria laughed. "I'm just demanding the level of service this place should offer. If they can't handle special requests, they don't deserve the prestige they have." Michael nodded slightly. "I'll do my best to meet your request, ma'am. I'll consult the chef and return shortly with a suggestion." Victoria smiled, satisfied with the idea of pushing Michael's and the restaurant's limits. She believed she was putting him in a difficult position, and the thought of frustrating someone she considered beneath her gave her evident pleasure. As Michael walked to the kitchen, he already knew what was coming. This kind of behavior, forcing an unusual request to test the patience of a waiter or chef, was common among customers who wanted to assert their superiority. He had seen it many times over the years. However, he wasn't worried in the slightest. In fact, he knew his team was more than capable of handling such challenges. In the kitchen, Michael explained the special request to the chef. "She wants seafood, but with a unique twist," he said, knowing the chef would immediately understand the type of situation in play. "She's trying to test you, huh?" The chef replied with an amused grin. "Don't worry, I'll whip up something special, something that'll make her think twice before testing us again." Michael smiled back, confident that the dish would impress, as always. "She's pushing boundaries, but we're used to it. We just need to keep doing what we do best." While the chef began preparing the dish, Michael continued serving other tables, but always kept an eye on Victoria's. He could sense that she was eager to find any fault in the service. Occasionally, she glanced in his direction, as if scrutinizing his every move, waiting for an opportunity to complain. After some time, the special seafood dish was ready. Michael made sure to deliver it personally, knowing this was a crucial moment. When he arrived at the table, he placed the dish in front of Victoria with all the care and professionalism she seemed to doubt he had. "Your dish, ma'am." The chef prepared a combination of grilled seafood with a touch of Mediterranean spices, accompanied by a herb puree and fresh vegetables. "I hope it's to your liking." Victoria looked at the plate with a satisfied smile, as if she was waiting for the moment she could find something to criticize. She picked up her fork slowly, cutting a piece of the grilled fish and bringing it to her mouth. There was a brief pause as she chewed slowly, almost as if she was trying to find something wrong. But to her surprise, the food was perfect. However, she wasn't willing to admit that. "It's acceptable," she finally said, maintaining the same disdainful tone as before. "But honestly, I expected something more creative. It's not much different from what you'd find anywhere else." Megan, who was already visibly uncomfortable, couldn't help but sigh. "Victoria, I think you're being too harsh. The dish looks excellent." "No, I'm not being harsh," Victoria insisted, keeping her composure. "I'm just demanding the standard this restaurant should offer. When you pay top dollar for a meal, that's what you expect. They need to understand that customers like me won't settle for the ordinary." Michael, staying composed, replied calmly, "I understand, ma'am. If you need anything else, I'll be nearby." "I hope so," Victoria replied, not breaking eye contact. She was clearly waiting for him to fail in some way, but so far, Michael hadn't given her any concrete reason to criticize. As Michael walked away, he could feel the weight of Victoria's gaze on his back. She was determined to test his patience to the limit. But Michael wasn't the type to be easily shaken. He had faced many challenges in his life and career, and he knew that dealing with customers like Victoria was part of his success. He returned to the kitchen, where the chef gave him a curious look. "Did she like it?" Michael smiled slightly. "She said it was acceptable, which, coming from her, is probably a compliment." The chef laughed. "Sounds like she's tougher than usual, But don't worry, we'll keep showing her who really knows food around here. As the night went on, Victoria continued to watch Michael, trying to find any flaw. But as always, he kept his cool, knowing that the time to reveal his true identity was still to come. As the evening went on, Victoria seemed more determined to assert her superiority. Her arrogance, noticeable from the start, began to take a more personal and offensive turn. Every interaction with Michael, the waiter she saw as beneath her, became an opportunity to reinforce her prejudiced views. "It's amazing who they hire these days," Victoria muttered to Megan as she watched Michael serving a nearby table. She smiled coldly, as if sharing an inside joke. "You know, this restaurant used to hire real professionals. Now it seems anyone can put on an apron and pretend to understand fine dining." Megan, once again uncomfortable, tried to steer the conversation away. "Victoria, I think he's doing a good job. Everything's been fine so far." Victoria scoffed. "That's because your standards are too low, Megan. Just look at him. He seems more suited for street work. I don't understand how someone like that ends up serving at the Rosewood." Michael overheard the comment from a distance. He was used to this kind of subtle disdain, but this time, Victoria's tone was becoming increasingly explicit. He remained calm, knowing the big reveal was coming soon, but he couldn't ignore the weight of her words. The racism Victoria so easily displayed was something Michael had faced his entire life, from his youth to the peak of his success as a business owner. When he returned to the table, Victoria was ready to strike again. "Waiter," she said, not even looking at him, "it seems you forgot to bring the side dish. I know it's hard for you to follow simple instructions, but it would be great if you could bring what I ordered." Michael, with his usual patience, calmly replied, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. I'll bring it right away." Victoria finally looked up at him, and for the first time that night, made direct eye contact, but with a gaze filled with contempt. "You'd better, if you can even understand what I'm saying." She let out a slight laugh and looked at Megan, who was trying to hide her discomfort. "You know, Megan, sometimes I forget that certain employees don't have the same background as we do. They just don't understand what quality service means." Michael stood firm, despite the obvious attack. He knew Victoria wasn't just criticizing his work, she was attacking his identity and race. The way she treated him, not as a human being, but as an object of her arrogance, was something he couldn't ignore for much longer. After serving the side dish, Michael was about to walk away when Victoria stopped him again. "Wait a moment," she said with a curious look and a hidden malice in her voice. "I have a question. Have you ever had the chance to visit a place like this before working here?" Michael, fully understanding the racist insinuation behind the question, stayed calm. "Yes, ma'am. I visit places like this regularly." Victoria let out a soft chuckle. "Of course you do." She shook her head slightly, as if amused by her own question. "But honestly, I'm curious. How did someone like you get a job here? I mean, you don't exactly look like the type of person I'd expect to see working at the Rosewood." The public humiliation and blatant racism in those words were noticed by several nearby tables, which grew silent as they watched the uncomfortable scene. Megan lowered her head, clearly embarrassed by her friend's behavior, but lacked the courage to intervene. Michael took a deep breath. He knew the moment to reveal the truth was approaching, but Victoria seemed even more determined to provoke him. "Have you ever thought," she continued, now taking on a patronizing tone, "that maybe you should stick to places where you fit in better? It's not a criticism, just an observation. Places like this can be complicated for certain people." At this moment, the manager, Daniel, approached the table. He had been informed about the growing tension and knew something had to be done before the situation got out of control. "Good evening, ma'am," Daniel said with a forced smile. "It seems there's been a problem. How can I assist you?" Victoria turned to him with an air of authority. "Yes, there is a problem. This waiter," she gestured toward Michael without even looking at him, "clearly isn't up to the standards of this restaurant. I don't understand how you allow people with no professional training to work in a place like this. Honestly, I'm shocked that the Rosewood has fallen so far in quality." Daniel kept his eyes fixed on Victoria, but his expression didn't change. He knew this was the moment Michael had been waiting for. With a barely noticeable nod, he invited Michael to step in. "Ma'am," Michael began, stepping forward. "I understand your experience hasn't been to your liking. But before we continue, there's something you need to know." Victoria narrowed her eyes, unsure of what he was about to say. "And what might that be?" Michael stayed calm, but this time, his voice carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what was coming. "I'm the owner of the Rosewood." The impact of his words was immediate and devastating. The smug smile that had been plastered on Victoria's face vanished in an instant. The color drained from her face, replaced by an expression of utter shock. Megan, sitting across from her, covered her mouth with her hand, unable to believe what she had just heard. "Bobby, what?" Victoria stammered, her voice trembling. You're joking, right?" Michael remained composed. "No, ma'am. My name is Michael Carter. I own this restaurant. I occasionally work undercover as a waiter to ensure that my customers are getting the best experience possible and to observe how both the staff and the guests interact. I've been doing this for years." Victoria was frozen. All her confidence, her arrogant posture, her thinly veiled racism crumbled in front of everyone nearby. The restaurant, once filled with lively conversations, was now dead silent, with all eyes fixed on Victoria's table. I didn't know," Victoria tried to stammer, now visibly panicked. If I knew you were the owner, I would never have." "That's the problem, ma'am," Michael interrupted her attempt at an excuse. "It shouldn't matter who I am, whether I'm the owner or just a waiter. What matters is how you treat people. And tonight, you treated me with complete disrespect. Not just as an employee, but as a human being." Victoria opened and closed her mouth several times, unable to form a coherent response. Megan, sitting beside her, couldn't hide her shame and discomfort, silently wishing she could disappear. Michael continued, "Here at the Rosewood, we value respect above all else. No matter someone's race, status, or position, everyone is treated with dignity. And tonight, ma'am, you failed to show that." Victoria, utterly humiliated, finally lowered her eyes, unable to look at Michael. I'm sorry," she muttered, but her words were empty, lacking the weight needed to fix the situation. Michael gave a small nod, maintaining his dignity. "I hope your next visit to the Rosewood will be different, ma'am, and that you'll reflect on what happened here tonight." With that, he stepped away from the table, leaving Victoria alone with the weight of her actions. Around them, the silence was palpable as the other guests absorbed what they had just witnessed. For the first time in a long while, Victoria was no longer in control. And this time, there were no excuses that could save her image. Victoria sat in silence, her hands trembling on the white linen tablecloth. The grandeur of the Rosewood, which had once seemed so opulent, now felt overwhelming. The quiet murmurs spreading from table to table and the lingering stares from other guests weighed heavily on her, and for the first time that night, she felt small, powerless. Megan, still speechless, glanced at her friend with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. "Victoria, I think we should go," she whispered, her voice thick with discomfort. Victoria, unable to process everything that had just happened, simply nodded. She could barely stand, feeling the weight of each step as she walked toward the exit. For the first time in her life, her arrogance and confidence had been shattered in a public and undeniable way. As she passed by the tables, she could feel the eyes on her. Eyes filled with judgment, disapproval, and perhaps even disgust. The same disdain she had projected onto Michael throughout the night was now aimed at her, and the impact was devastating. Victoria had always believed herself to be above everyone, untouchable in her bubble of privilege, but now her world had been turned upside down. On her way out, she passed Daniel, the manager, who watched her with a serene, almost indifferent expression. He said nothing, but his eyes conveyed a clear message. There was a new standard of behavior at the Rosewood, and customers like Victoria were no longer welcome if they couldn't meet it. Victoria and Megan left the restaurant in silence, the cold New York night cutting through the air with an intensity that mirrored Victoria's emotional state. Outside, the cars drove by. The city life continued, indifferent to her humiliation. Back inside, Michael allowed himself a moment of reflection. He knew that tonight had been significant, not just for exposing Victoria's prejudice, but for reaffirming his values as a businessman and a human being. He had fought for everything he had, from his humble beginnings to owning one of the city's most prestigious restaurants. And along the way, he had faced many people like Victoria, individuals who judged him based on his skin color or appearance without ever knowing his true story. Daniel approached Michael, interrupting his thoughts. "You handled that very well, Michael." She had no idea who she was dealing with. Michael gave a slight but tired smile. "It wasn't the first time, Daniel, and unfortunately, it won't be the last. But this was an important victory," Daniel commented. "She'll never forget this." "I hope she learned something," Michael replied, his tone more serious. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone. I'm here to remind people that everyone deserves respect. Whether I'm the owner or just a waiter, what matters is the dignity with which we treat each other." The restaurant was beginning to return to normal, the guests resuming their conversations, though many were still whispering about what they had just witnessed. Michael glanced around, satisfied that even after the episode with Victoria, the energy in the room remained intact. He had managed to keep his composure, and that had been enough to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. Shortly after, a few customers began approaching Michael, thanking him for the excellent service and the welcoming atmosphere he had created. An elderly woman, seated at one of the nearby tables, walked up to him. "You're a very patient man," she said with a kind smile. Not everyone would have kept their composure in front of a woman like that. Michael smiled back, touched by her kindness. "Thank you very much, ma'am. Sometimes patience is the best response." She nodded, picking up her purse and getting ready to leave. "You have a beautiful restaurant here. I'll be back more often." Michael thanked her again and watched as she left, feeling more confident in his mission to make the Rosewood a place of respect. Not just for the quality of the food, but for the atmosphere of equality he was determined to cultivate. As the night came to a close and the restaurant emptied out, Michael slowly walked back to his office in the rear of the establishment. He sat down in his chair and allowed himself a few minutes of reflection. Although he had dealt with similar situations before, there was something different about this confrontation with Victoria. Perhaps it was the rawness of the racism she had displayed, or the way he had once again shown that respect and dignity always prevail. He thought about his journey, the obstacles he had faced as a black man in an industry dominated by white elites, the challenges of being seen as an equal by his peers, and how hard he had worked to prove that he not only belonged in this world, but that he thrived in it. The incident with Victoria was a reminder that the fight against prejudice was ongoing, but also a reaffirmation that he was on the right path. The sound of soft footsteps at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Daniel, who had entered with a slight smile. "I think you deserved a quieter night after all that, don't you think?" Michael laughed, shaking his head. "Definitely, but I think tonight was one of those moments that remind us why we do what we do." Daniel nodded. "You did more than just keep your cool. You showed everyone what true dignity looks like." Michael smiled back, rising from his chair. "I think we can all learn something from nights like this, and hopefully, Victoria did too." As Michael turned off the office lights and prepared to leave, he walked out with the certainty that, although prejudice still existed, he had the power to fight it with calm, resilience, and integrity. And that, for him, was more than enough. What did you think of Victoria's actions? Share your opinion in the comments. We'd love to hear what you thought. Your participation is important to us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Thanks for watching.